Hey, good afternoon. It is Tuesday, July 17th, and I'm David Menzies filling in for Ezra, and this is Battleground. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in and thank you for putting up with me yet again. Ezra, as you may or may not know, is in the UK, and the good news is that he was given entry into the UK, unlike some other right-of-center people in recent months and years. And the even better news is he hasn't been told to leave the UK yet. And of course, he's there to cover the Tommy Robinson hearing that is scheduled for tomorrow. And we will bring you up to date with everything that goes on there. Very important what's happening there, of course, and this is a huge issue for most of you, I know. Now, being the middle of July, before we get to the burning news of the day, gotta say, it is the baseball All-Star game tonight, and I've done an informal poll amongst all my friends, families, and colleagues here at The Rebel, asking who's watching it. And you know what? Rhymes with hero. The number is 0. And I think this basically supports my position that, is it not time to get rid of all-star games in all the sports? I mean, arguably, baseball's is the most meaningful, but I think these are, I don't know, throwbacks to the past that are no longer relevant anymore, folks. I mean, once upon a time, you never saw the American League and the National League players compete against each other unless it was a World Series, of course. Now there's interleague games. And once upon a time, there was very little sports on TV. There'd be a weekly or bi-weekly game. Now we have 24-hour sports channels. And we see things happening on the West Coast, whereas you'd only read about them 2 days later in the press. So that was kind of the idea for an all-star game. Let's have one night where in prime time on the East Coast, everybody gets to see the stars. And now I think, given the advent of 24-hour sports television and how the leagues have changed, there is no real reason for an all-star game. Not only baseball, but hockey. What is that? It's just glorified shinny. I mean, it's a disgrace to call that product a hockey game, even when they put $1 million on the line for the winning team. As for football, the Pro Bowl, well, as the saying goes, if you bet on the Pro Bowl, you have a gambling addiction problem, okay? I mean, not even the players competing in the Pro Bowl want to be at the Pro Bowl. So enough about speaking of sports, because we really don't do that here unless there's a political element to it. And speaking of politics, plenty of that coming out of Helsinki yesterday. Trump had his meeting with Putin. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of that, I think we have a clip. And if we can run that right here, that would be fantastic.
People came to me, Dan Coates came to me and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server of the Pakistani gentleman that worked on the DNC. Where are those servers? They're missing. Where are they? What happened to Hillary Clinton's emails? 33,000 emails gone, just gone. I think in Russia they wouldn't be gone so easily. I think it's a disgrace that we can't get Hillary Clinton's 33,000 emails. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer.
Well, you know, folks, I'm not one of the multitude of Trump critics out there. Far from it. I do like the president. I think he's he has all the hallmarks of being a great president, as a matter of fact. Yesterday was not his greatest moment, however. I don't know, it really rang hollow when he said, well, you know, I spoke to Putin and Putin strongly denied any involvement. It's kind of like, the detective on a murder case going to a suspect and saying, we asked him if he had anything to do with the murder, and he said no. So, hey, what are you going to do? You got to believe him. Now, I'm not saying that I believe in the Russian collusion theory. Far from it. I do believe that ever since the inception of the Soviet Union, they have done everything in their power to interfere with most elections in important Western democracies. However, what I would have liked to have seen the president do yesterday was to take a more firm stance with Putin. And on that point, when it comes to the larger picture of Russian interference, I would have loved for the president to say to him, stare him down and say, we know what you're doing. We're not going to stand for it anymore. We're watching you because this is unacceptable. I think if he had done that, I think he would have answered the critics on both sides. That statement about, well, we asked him, he denied it, so who are you going to believe? I don't think that cuts it, and maybe there's a way for him to get out of this rigmarole. And I have to say, too, for those who remember the Stephen Harper era, it was Stephen Harper that really took a tough stance on Russia. It was Stephen Harper who led the charge in terms of criticism about the Soviet Union when it came to Russia, the charge against Russia against their involvement in Ukraine. And it was also Harper that led the charge against Russia for what they were doing in Crimea, and actually led the charge to get Russia kicked out of the G7, which was eventually what happened. That was tough talk and principled talk, and I would have liked to have seen that kind of a stance taken by the president yesterday, and we didn't get it. And I think even Trump supporters are not all that happy with that performance yesterday. Let's see what you have to say in terms of if we're getting any comments on that. Mark Jones says, Donald is a Putinist and believes... folks, I am going to try to get better with this, but the chat keeps going a little faster than... and my computer is frozen again. Copa Desayo says, was it guilty until proven innocent, or was it innocent until proven guilty? Well, depends if you're a Democrat or a Republican, I guess. And then we have Grant R. Was something said about Trump in Scotland? I know he was golfing in Scotland, but if you can elaborate on that, I'll get into it. And we have from PKE Racing, Scheer is a soy boy, too bad Michelle Rampell isn't leader. I would like to see Michelle Rampell as leader as well. Debbie Ursa says, you are buying into the BS, Menzies. Well, I'm not. I mean, listen, I call him as I see him. We were talking about the baseball all-star game. I think people in this position have to be like the umpire behind home plate. You got to call them like you see them. You can't just do PR for those you support, no matter what they say, no matter what their actions are. And I just think yesterday was a stumble. I'm sorry. And if you can make your case, I'll read it. Please send it in. E. El Dorado, all we know about Putin is pure propaganda by the deep state. Well, it is a propaganda state, to be sure. Mark Hagopian says, as a Trump supporter, the only collusion was with Hillary. If they had something out, would already be front page news. I agree with that too, by the way. I think there's a lot more shall we say, despicable actions on the behalf of the Democrats than the Republicans when it comes to any kind of collusion. But I think we have seen certain arms of law enforcement and intelligence gathering in the United States being politically influenced. And that is why the Democrats are getting to skate on so many of these allegations. And Dil Mendonca writes, what's your opinion on the Libertarian Party? Which Libertarian Party, if you can clear that up? I think the Libertarian Party stands for many of the things I stand for. Certainly the Ontario Libertarian Party. I saw the leader being interviewed in the last provincial election, and many of the things he was saying, such as get government out of elements of our life that they shouldn't be in, like running casinos, like running liquor stores, and on it goes. Those are libertarian principles I totally buy into. And Debbie Ursa writes back, he cannot publicly embarrass Putin. That would be disastrous. Well, I don't know why. And didn't he already publicly embarrass Putin? I mean, when the U.S. sent in those missile strikes to Syria, this was against the wishes of Russia and Putin. So I think that's even more than publicly embarrassing that. And I think, folks, as I said yesterday, Russia's a bit of a strange fish here when it comes to the West. It is neither an enemy nor is it an ally. And there is some kind of middle ground that we have to take with them. And I just think that, much like Stephen Harper, when it comes to calling out Russia for doing bad things, that's what you have to do. And I think maybe the president could have been more forceful on that yesterday. Let's see what else we have here. El Dorado says, if he did, they would say Trump starting World War III. Well, I think he's already been accused of attempting to start World War III with Iran and North Korea. So these kind of ridiculous statements can apply to any power. I think maybe if Donald Trump took a harsh stance against Grenada, they would accuse that as the stepping stone towards the path of World War III. And what else do we have here? Mark Jones, the football was bugged. Secret Service left it there, confirmed. Well, maybe that's why. I think the football that Mark's referring to, folks, is the gift Putin gave Trump. We call it a soccer ball over here. It wasn't the oblong pigskin variety. And Trump said he was going to give it to his son, who is a big soccer fan. And then he threw it into the crowd, into Melania's waiting hands. So maybe if Trump thought there was a bug in there, he did a very important and prudent thing by getting rid of that hot potato, too sweet. And we have from El Chapagabera, Harper is no different than Trudeau and Scheer. They all want globalism. No, I don't buy that. I don't agree with that. That's kind of conspiracy theory stuff. And the deep state, no. Anyways, so keep your comments coming about your take on this meeting. I'm happy to read them when we get them. And perhaps moving on, speaking of the president, this is incredible what's happening in the U.S. right now. You've seen Republicans in public places such as restaurants being screamed at, being yelled at so much that they have to leave the facility just because there are a bunch of lunatics there that don't agree with their politics. But folks, have you been keeping track about what's happening with the ride-sharing service Uber? There's been a couple of cases down south where the Uber driver has simply discontinued the ride because he didn't like the brand of politics that had entered his car. Now, one of the stories is about some individuals who began talking politics. And obviously, I take it from who they are. They were pro-Trump, pro-Republican. And the Uber driver, this was a 20-mile long ride. The Uber driver pulled over to a gas station, just a random gas station, and basically did the Arnold Schwarzenegger line from Terminator 2, get out. Basically saying that people with your politics can't have a ride in this vehicle. And last week, there were 3 young interns, all of whom were black, in Washington, D.C., and they were carrying Make America Great Again caps. They weren't even wearing them. And once the driver saw what those caps were, he told them, get out. He denied them service. I mean, it's, I don't know, it's almost like the 2018 version of Rosa Parks going on here. But have we entered a realm where having a particular political opinion or wearing a particular fashion statement that has your politics on it, that means you are now denied service? And I have to say, Uber has really dropped the ball from a public relations standpoint. In both cases, I believe they've issued a statement that we're looking into it. Well, why does it take so long to look into this? I mean, this is, I think, an egregious breach of terms of service, and it shouldn't be tolerated. And I wonder also what the media coverage would be if it was reversed. If these were Uber drivers who were right of center and for whatever reason discovered that there were left of center people in their vehicles and they decided to either not offer the ride or just pull over to some random gas station and tell them to get out. It is outrageous. And whatever happened to the idea of agreeing to disagree? And by the way, if you are an Uber driver, right? I know Uber drivers get engaged in conversation, and that's fantastic. But if you can't, find it within yourself to have a debate and to have a discussion and thrash the issues through without saying, get out of my vehicle, then why don't you just shut up and do what you're being paid for, which is to bring somebody from point A to point B. I mean, I don't think there's anything, I might be wrong, in the Uber terms of service that indicate that those with a right of center political viewpoint shall be denied a ride if the driver deems that is necessary. So there you go. And let's see what some of you have to say. Rattlesnake rather says, course Uber drivers in the US would do that. This would be illegal. I think it might be. It's certainly what we have to have here, I think, is a test case and see if this passes the sniff test for legality. And we have a super chat from Betty Bennett. Free Tommy. Absolutely. And you know what? I wonder if I have a free Tommy cap at home. A wonderful fan at the last Rebel Live event gave it to me. And I wonder if I was wearing that in an Uber car or in a cab in the UK. I wonder if that would get me kicked out of a cab there too. Maybe it's worth doing a test on. But thank you very much for your generous gift of £5 sterling. And let's see, that's Amanda Joy says, no ride for you. Yeah, I think Amanda's referring to the infamous soup Nazi of Seinfeld fame. That's the fellow who ran that incredible soup kitchen. And unless you had your mannerisms down to a T, i.e. you had to line up a certain way, you had to have your money ready, you couldn't make any kind of small talk, you couldn't make any substitutions. And if you veered from that, as Elaine Bennis found out, the answer was no soup for you. So yeah, we are in the soup Nazi regime of Ubering, it would seem. And USA Mama Mummy writes, unfrickin' believable. I agree, it is unbelievable. And El Dorado makes a good point. Good, they lose half of their business. That is actually a very good point, because are things so good for Uber drivers now that you can be picky about who you want to give a ride to? I mean, there are other competing services now, such as Lyft. Lyft came into the Toronto market late last year. And I know for a fact that there are far more Uber drivers today than there were just 2 or 3 years ago in all the markets they serve. So I wonder, is Ubering so lucrative that, a driver can go, I don't like the cap that guy's wearing. I don't like her T-shirt. I don't like this guy's political viewpoints, because in the end, it's self-defeating. I mean, at the end of the day, it's to get fares and make money? I mean, that is why you're driving strangers around town, isn't it? Or maybe if there's some Uber drivers out there that can educate me on the reality of Ubering, I'll bring that to the foray too. And Tammy writes, some taxi drivers of a religious persuasion are also denying service to people with guide dogs. You know, you're absolutely right, Tammy. This is an issue that comes up from time to time, and it's typically blind people with seeing eye dogs. And you are not allowed, I mean, the law is very clear on this. You cannot deny a blind person service. And as I understand it from stories that have been published on this in the past, typically the people who are denying the service are Muslim cab drivers, believing this is haram to have a dog in the car, even a trained service dog. And the way I understand it is that their out is that I can't do this not for religious reasons, but because I have an allergy to dogs. Well, I'm not a U of T mathematician, folks, but I can tell you this. If it's found that 99.99% of Muslim cab drivers have an allergy to canines, I would say that is statistically impossible. Not improbable, impossible. But that is the card that is always being played when this comes to task. And it is despicable, and it shouldn't be tolerated, and it shouldn't. And also for Uber drivers as well, it should not be tolerated too. And religion, I don't believe, is a valid excuse to deny someone. I mean, can you imagine that? Can you imagine going through life blind and you're dependent on your dog to get you around? I mean, it's a fate I wouldn't wish on anyone. And then you have to add into the mix that, because of the way I interpret my religion, you're not getting in. And by the way, interesting thing, I once heard an interview it was a Muslim group that represented blind Muslims who are out making an outreach to taxi cab drivers to say that there is nothing really wrong. There's nothing against the Quran in having a dog that is assisting a handicapped person into your taxi cab, because when you think of it, some of the blind people out there are of the Muslim faith, and they're getting burned by this kind of belligerent stance too, I would argue. So good point, Tammy. And let's see. Okay, Sam Hale writes, always be aware that Uber is a private vehicle. It's not yours because you paid to the third-party app. This is what freedom is. Stop pretending it's not freedom. Well, that's the interesting thing about this. Yeah, you're right. It is an Uber driver would be, I guess, by nature, an agent, a freelancer, not an employee of the Uber corporation. But by the same token, I bet you that Uber drivers have to sign an agreement in terms of service about who they can and cannot take in that cab. I mean, for example, I just wonder what the media outrage would be if somebody came into an Uber car and was wearing the niqab or the burqa. Would this be just dismissed? Oh, well, it's freedom of choice. No, that, unlike the MAGA hats and the political discussions, that would be front page news, and it would be Islamophobia, and you can bet your life Uber would get on this case very quickly indeed, unlike what they're doing right now, ragging the puck with the right of center people being kicked out. Let's see. From Real Men Fish, buy bacon and hail an Uber cab. Well, it depends on who's driving it. Me, I love the scent of bacon. I love the taste of bacon. No problem here. And Tammy writes back, Uber drivers are indeed subcontracted to provide a service. And that's what I was getting at, folks, that I think you have to agree to the terms of service in order to be an Uber driver. And but isn't it just petty? Let's forget about any agreements that have been signed. personally, being in this business, I'm always getting into debates and arguments with other people. And I've never taken the point of view that because you disagree with me, this discussion must end. Or because you disagree with me, get out of the car. I've never taken that position. I think it's a cowardly position. I mean, if you can't state your case with your words, as opposed to shutting down the debate, I would argue you really don't have much of a case at all. And let's see. Okay, Michael Lefebvre writes, good afternoon. If Tommy does get, or I don't know if you mean does not get released or does get released, do you think the British government will have to explain themselves, or will they just shut us off like they always do? They're probably under no obligation to explain themselves. And right now, I'd really like to know what they are thinking. I think that they've bitten off more than they could chew. They thought they were shutting down, they were literally, putting an end to the messenger of a message they didn't want out there, and quickly realized they had a potential martyr on their hands, especially if, God forbid, anything were to happen to Tommy in jail. But there have been protests and demonstrations. I don't think they counted on that. And I think the vast majority of British people, if you were to speak to them honestly, they are Tommy supporters, and they don't like what's happening to their country. And they don't like how right now in the UK, it is proverbially the tail wagging the dog. So this is going to be a fascinating case Ezra's going to cover, and you're going to hear it first, right here from Ezra, from that British courtroom. And let's see, what else do we have? Okay, Wake Up writes, cabs only for me. Well, you know what? That's your choice. If you can still find a cab these days, I guess. I know they've been really hit hard by the ride-sharing services. But who's to say that this kind of an attitude wouldn't be espoused by a cab driver as well? As Tammy pointed out, we already have incidents where cab drivers refuse service to blind people with seeing eye dogs. So I don't know if a cab is a viable alternative. And let's see what okay. And Tammy, again, you're right, David. It's petty to throw people out of your vehicle for a hat, etc. And El Dorado says, if Uber has a bad driver, the driver will soon be out of work when they have 0 stars. That's right. Uber drivers and their customers are rated on a stars service. I don't know, what the benchmark is. 5 stars is perfect, 0 is 0. And I don't know what the number is for Uber to say to a driver, listen, just about every rider is complaining about you for whatever reason, so you're off the platform. But I guess that is one way of a check and a balance for the ride-sharing service. And what else do we have here? Okay, I think we've pretty much covered off the Uber issue. So why don't we move along to, yes, Gerald Butts, and immigration. We have a horrible mess right now in Canada thanks to this government's reaction to, I don't know what you want to call them, because I don't even know what they are. Are they refugees? Are they asylum seekers? Are they migrants? Are they people that are jumping the queue? Are they economic migrants? I know one thing for sure. There was a story in it about this in The Sun today by Mark Bonikowski, outrageously bungled. I agree with that headline. You probably can't see it. It's an asylum seeker coming face to face with an RCMP officer, and it's at an illegal border crossing, and I guess he's making his case there for the RCMP officer to carry his luggage. But speaking of luggage, I notice He's got what appears to be a really posh high-end jacket on, and also an Adidas logoed backpack. I don't think that's cheap. I don't think that's the kind of stuff you get at Dollarama. And everything looks new, and he doesn't look hungry, and looks like he doesn't look disheveled. And again, it is someone who is male, typically in their 20s or 30s, that are coming across the border. And the more I see of this, the more I chalk it up to economic opportunism. If you don't have to get in line and queue up and make your case to be a Canadian citizen, and all you have to do is walk across some farmer's field or some vacant lot somewhere along the longest unprotected border in the world, well, why not? Why wouldn't you do it? Especially if you're leaving a country where there is, such little economic opportunity for you. But that's not how our system works, and it's not how it should work. And what I really find outrageous by the Trudeau Liberals, especially Gerald Butts, who is, of course, Justin's puppet master. Listen to this tweet, folks. Quote, "Enough is enough. It's time to stand up to this divisive fear-mongering about asylum seekers. Let's not allow the alt-right to do here what they're doing elsewhere." End quote. Okay, two things. Gerald, where is elsewhere? He never says where this elsewhere is. So where is it? What are you referring to? And also, this nonsense about the alt-right, that this is some kind of sinister boogeyman laying under our bed. This is the real threat to Canada and our values. Can you stop it already, Gerald? No one's buying what you're selling. We just believe in sovereign borders. If a nation doesn't have borders, it ceases to be a nation. I mean, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times. There was, I still have it, the paper edition. It was an opinion piece by an Italian contributing writer. And just look at this. We have some footage here. You saw some of the Royal Canadian Baggage Police in action there. But folks, look at this headline. This is in the New York Times. Are Italians turning racist? Not yet. And I show you the paper version because if you go online, guess what? That headline has been tweaked. It's no longer that. It's something a little less controversial. But the whole idea of this piece is that Italians are becoming more racist because they want their government to enforce tighter border controls. I mean, there are already 611,000 illegals in Italy. Most of them, again, like I said earlier, young men. And it makes me wonder, by the way, if these are indeed refugees, where are the women? Where are the children? Where are the elderly? You need a detective to find them, practically. And the solution here by this writer is that what the government should be doing instead of enforcing its border security and instead of deporting illegals, and by the way, most of the deported people don't leave anyways, is to issue temporary job permits as if there are 611,000 jobs begging right now in Italy. It's preposterous. And it is absolutely egregious that this author would label Italians as racist, or at least turning racist, because they want strong borders around their country. Like I said, a country without borders, it's not a country at all. And let's go and see what we have to do with this. And by the way, it's not just Gerald Butts. Our immigration minister, Ahmad Hassan, he had words for Lisa MacLeod and Doug Ford. And I think we have a clip of that, don't we, guys? Because seeing is believing.
Asylum seekers are processed in a separate queue at the IRB, and all the other regular immigration programs are processed by IRCC. And conflating the two knowingly is irresponsible, it's divisive, it's fear-mongering, and it is not Canadian.
You see, there again, it's the not Canadian card. And the fear-mongering and the divisiveness, I would say, isn't this what the federal government is doing? Having, it seems, one set of rules for certain people and a different set for others. And, kudos to Lisa MacLeod. I understand that when Mr. Hussein was using those words, she left. She's not going to, take these kind of pot shots that she's un-Canadian. And let's not forget what the cost is to just Ontario alone, not counting the other provinces. So far, $174 million. And by the way, that's a running tote board, folks. That number goes up each and every day. Another refugee or asylum seeker or migrant or whatever you want to call them heads to an Ontario city or town. So the province does indeed have skin in the game. And again, it's egregious to play the patriotism card, to say that someone who wants stronger borders and a more responsible immigration system is therefore un-Canadian. And I got to say this too, for Mr. Hussein and Justin Trudeau and Gerald Butts and all the rest, why not lead by example? Right now, Toronto's shelter system is bursting at the seams because of illegals. We even have hockey rinks that have been converted into refugee or migrant shelters. We have university dorms that are currently vacant because the kids are on summer holiday right now, housing migrants. And the clock is literally ticking. Come Labor Day, when it's time to put in the ice in those hockey rinks, when it's time to welcome back the students to those dormitories, where do those people go? Like I said, the shelter system in Toronto is already at capacity. This is grotesque liberal mismanagement. And I have to tell you, folks, next time you get your paycheck and you look at all those deductions, just think of where a lot of your money right now is going, and it doesn't have to be going there at all. This is, at the end of the day, virtue signaling by liberals, and I totally disregard any criticism from the likes of Butts and Hussein, who say that speaking out against this horrible immigration policy that we're saddled with right now is an act of racism or an alt-right opinion, or it is un-Canadian. I think the precise opposite is true, folks, that opening these borders to everyone and for any reason at all, making Canada a sanctuary country, I think that's un-Canadian. Because how do we know the people that are coming here in this illegal fashion even subscribe to Canadian values? Yeah, that's right, I said it, Canadian values. I know that is a trigger for some people out there, but that is the point of having strong border control, and hopefully if and when there's regime change in Ottawa, this can be rectified, because I don't see anything moving forward. And like I said, the date to watch is Labor Day, when the rinks and the dormitories have to be used for their intended purposes. Or maybe not. Maybe maybe that would be a Canadian thing, eh? Oh yeah, the kids want to play ice hockey, but you know what? We have all these claimants that need a place to stay. So hey kids, just say goodbye to your season. We'll aim for the 2019-2020 season instead. And so I'll go to the board and see what some of you have to say, if I may. And bear with me, folks. It seems to have frozen again. Maybe one of my trained broadcast professionals can come in. And I think we do have another clip, by the way. I did mention Lisa MacLeod, who said, rightfully so, that Hussein should apologize. Do we have that? Yep, okay, check it out.
What I saw here today was an attempt to talk, him calling me un-Canadian, which I take great offense to, and I do hope he will apologize and reconsider his language. I also won't be bullied into accepting what the federal government is doing, because we do have severe and significant challenges inside the province of Ontario. So with that, I was very clear that we would not sign the communique, that there is a problem at the border. The border must be enforced, and that Ontario should be made whole for all of the costs that we have incurred. And in addition to that, I would just like to point out that the federal government has only promised us $11 million, and that has yet to flow. So again, that is insufficient, inadequate, and I'm calling on the federal government to reconsider. I think maybe the minister should sit down, have a nice cup of tea, calm down a little bit, and maybe phone me and apologize for calling me un-Canadian. Thank you.
Beautiful. I love that tough talk. Good for you, Lisa MacLeod. And yeah, Minister Hussein, why don't you take her up on that offer for a cup of tea and an apology on the side? She certainly deserves it after such an egregious attack on her character. I mean, imagine that. You're trying to do the responsible thing and you're being called un-Canadian. Outrageous. And I see we have a super chat from Ole Larson. $100. Thank you so much. Or is DKK not exactly $1? Do we know that? Is that some other foreign currency? Regardless of what it is, I want to thank you very much for that generous donation. And it's a question. Is Ezra Levant in the United Kingdom right now? Ole, he is indeed. We started the beginning of the show with news that Ezra will be at the Tommy trial tomorrow, or hearing, I should say. And he did get into the UK. And by the way, that wasn't a slam dunk, folks. Those of you know that, hey, the likes of Lauren Southern denied access, and so many others from going to the UK simply because they have a different political viewpoint, or a viewpoint that might be, kind of offensive to a certain minority group that we don't want to offend. So therefore, so much for freedom of speech. It is so sad what's happening in the UK. I tend to believe Ezra when he thinks we're maybe 10 or even 5 to 7 years away of this kind of action that we see in the UK, basically shutting down debate that we don't like. And it's not fear-mongering on the behalf of Ezra. Motion M103, just look at the wording of that, taking a stance against racism and Islamophobia. I'm always curious about that. Why Islamophobia is the one form of racism, if you will, or bias that is segregated out there. There's nothing about anti-Semitism, hatred towards Sikhs, Buddhists, Christians, you name it, just Islamophobia. And by the way, we still don't have, at this late hour, a definition of what Islamophobia is. Anyways, what's happened in Britain could happen here in the near future unless we take a stand and speak out against it. Oh, and that the voice in my head says that was a $20 clip, so I want to thank you very much for that. And by the way, we should take a look at, maybe one of the reasons a sanctuary country, a nation that is there is no such thing as anyone being illegal, is not such a good thing. Why don't we look south of the border at that democratic panacea known as San Francisco, the city by the bay, a beautiful city. I think San Francisco is one of the most beautiful and unique cities in the world. Haven't been there for many years. Not sure I want to go back given what I'm reading and what I'm seeing on YouTube. But it is, San Francisco is turning into a proverbial shithole. There's the headline on the New York Post: San Francisco streets are littered with free syringes. By the way, where are these needles coming from? Yeah, that's right, the city of San Francisco. And I have And that is not hype on that headline, by the way, folks. There was a study done in terms of, they were looking at it's hard to read this, trash, feces, and number of hypodermic drug needles in a 153 city block area of San Francisco. And here are the results of the study from earlier this year. There was trash on every block. That's right. All 153 blocks, city blocks, had trash. Secondly, there were more than 300 piles of human feces on 96 blocks. So, practically 2/3 of that sample size were covered in feces. How gross is that? And they also found 100 drug needles on 41 blocks. And that is a real deadly health hazard. I mean, if you get mistakenly stabbed by that kind of trash, you better get yourself to a hospital very quickly. And, for those who are saying, and by the way, there's a nice headline on the Daily Wire, what liberal policies bring, junkies shoot up in public in Nancy Pelosi's home district. Now, yeah, you wouldn't see Nancy Pelosi walking through the streets of San Francisco. She's going to be in some kind of bulletproof armored limousine, I should think. But if you do go onto YouTube, you will see a series of tent cities just taking over this so-called sanctuary city now. It's a disgrace. And guess what? In the Department of Foreshadowing, is this where some Canadian cities are perhaps headed, folks? Because I look at the Toronto Board of Health, and yesterday the Toronto Board of Health voted to ask the federal government to explore options to fully legalize and regulate all drug use in Canada. Yeah, that's right. So all drugs, so we're talking, there you go from the Toronto Star, decriminalize all drugs, Toronto Health Board urges Ottawa. I saw in the story to actually legalize, which is a step further than decriminalize. And is this where we are headed? I mean, Toronto is officially a sanctuary city. And the vast majority of council, I think when the vote was taken a few years ago, voted for that. I think only 3 councillors voted against that. But now, is this the route we're going? Are we going down the San Francisco route where it'll be the city handing out these syringes? And by the way, the vast majority of those needles found in that survey, they were somehow able to identify them, did indeed come from the city of San Francisco. Now you're looking at the video here, BART Junkies. So that BART is of course an acronym for Bay Area Rapid Transit. And I imagine that's a tunnel leading into the subway system. Could you imagine walking through that? Especially if maybe you're by yourself and female and it's nighttime. Does the word sanctuary city, resonate there? It seems to be a sanctuary for some. It seems to be downright deadly for others. And my God, piles of human feces on 96 out of 153 city blocks. And by the way, we're not talking about the wrong side of the tracks in San Francisco. A lot of these blocks where this study took place, folks, were in touristy areas. So I would imagine that's going to have a detrimental effect on tourism as time goes on. And let's see, we got another chat here from Tammy again. Thank you, Tammy. Trudeau will expect students to sleep in tents on campus until, I can't read that word there, flies, in order to leave migrants in the dorms. It's interesting, Tammy. That's what it boils down to, doesn't it? When push comes to shove, who's going to get the dormitories? Is it going to be the migrants or the students? And with the way this Liberal government virtue signals, I could see them making the case for the migrants. And maybe we'll see that on the campuses of certain universities tent cities created, not for the migrants, but for the students. And you know what? I think I support that the more I think about this. I mean, have these virtue signaling university students who think this is just, the bee's knees, what's going on in terms of immigration policy. I wonder in January when it's minus 35 with the wind chill and you're living in a tent city with a generator, pushing in what passes for central heating to keep you alive. I wonder then if you have your little come to Jesus moment in terms of immigration policy and sanctuary cities. So, Tammy, I'm going to say good for the government if they do go ahead with that. And we have a super chat from Jolly Jester, $5. Thank you so much for your generosity, Jolly Jester. What do you think about the decision of Education Minister Lisa Thompson to include gender identity without parental consultation after the curriculum repeal? I want to read into that because from what I see right now with the sex ed curriculum, there seems to be, and I'm not certain, folks, because I want to see the final product. There seems to be a little wavering and flip-flopping there, because I know when Doug Ford was on the campaign trail, and I saw him personally speak about this on so many occasions. One of the biggest bugaboos about the new sex ed curriculum was the lack of parental consultation. There was virtually nothing. It was the Wynne government basically saying, listen, we know what we're doing, and we have incredible eggheads on the team like, Ben Levin. You remember Ben Levin? He convicted for child pornography and creating child pornography, and he's one of the authors of the new sex ed curriculum. Yeah, so all the tall forehead types know what they're doing. So you parents, even though it's your children, we're the co-parents. We know what's best for them. That was the narrative then. I sure hope there is going to be a thorough consultation process with the parents regarding the new and hopefully improved sex ed curriculum that's going to come out of this PC government. So let's see what that does. And let's see. And you know what, folks? This machine really hates me. It is just frozen on the same chat. And oh, wait a minute, I've fixed it, which is good because the trained broadcast professionals who know what they're doing, they always blame it on me. And they're always right, by the way. There's some little button I always click that freezes up something, but I think I've got it going again. So my apologies then. Let's see. Paul Greening writes, none of these refugees are really refugees. When you say the term none, that's the point. I don't know if the number is zero. I have to assume that maybe there are some genuine refugees. And that's the thing. If there are genuine refugees that are getting screwed by those who are gaming the system, and by the way, those who are gaming the system, I fully believe are the vast majority of people. I'm not being an apologist for the left here, my friend, but then, shouldn't the people who support genuine refugees be asking for tighter border controls too? Because if the genuine refugees are going to be kicked out along with the gamers, then we've done them a disservice. But I guess it doesn't work like that, not when you subscribe to no one is illegal and this is a nation that should have open borders. And if you say anything against that, according to the minister, the federal minister of immigration, then you are un-Canadian. Incredible. Okay then. And Amanda Joy writes, Canadians are always being scolded like children for not playing nice. I have to agree. I mean, how much more nice can you get than Canadians? I mean, in terms of our immigration policy, basically we say no, we don't say no to anyone. And that's why we're in this financial sinkhole. And who knows what the societal costs are going to be in the years ahead. That will be interesting to keep an eye on. And Miss Lil Pig writes, irregular is what Hussein calls them. Someone pass the Pepto. You know what? You're absolutely right. We're not even allowed to use terms like illegal alien or illegal immigrant. Irregular. I remember doing a commentary on this last year, and basically, I used to think, folks, that irregular was what you called a pair of socks that had some kind of, manufacturer's error. And I remember bringing in a pair of high-end fashion socks. The original price was $16. Well, it'll be a cold day in Hades before the Menzoid buys a pair of socks for $16. But because they were irregular, I think I was able to buy them for $2. And I couldn't tell where the irregularity was. But yeah, that's what I use the term irregular for, to describe a manufactured pair of socks that isn't 100% perfect. Now we're supposed to use the word irregular for somebody who is actually illegal. These guys in Ottawa can't even say the word illegal. So if they can't even use the proper terminology, how are we ever going to hope to solve this problem with this crew in Ottawa in the first place? And Paul Greening writes, we have plenty of homeless already. Yes, we do. Toronto, and for that matter, San Francisco, very expensive cities to live in. There are poor people. There are the working poor. There are so many people right now, I would argue, that are one little calamity away, like, the transmission on their car blowing, or, some kind of unexpected financial event happening in their household, that are, just one event away from getting into serious financial trouble. And yet we're supposed to have the wherewithal to take care of all these people, many of whom we don't even know who they are or what they're about. Absolutely terrible. And let's see, PKE Racing notes that hockey is racist. You know what? I'm sure we live in a world now where you could dismiss that remark as being ludicrous, but I bet you somebody on campus in the months and years away when they've run out of causes, they'll probably go after hockey as being racist. I mean, hockey right now is, and for most of its inception, has been a very white sport. Not that it's closed off to any kind of visible minorities, but the very fact that it is predominantly white would make it racist, whereas the NBA being predominantly black, well, that wouldn't make it racist, because being predominantly of another race other than white is good. So you are right. I can see that argument being made. And here we have from Blaine Sandberg, most federal Liberal politicians do not care, thus do not listen to the average Canadian about this illegal immigrant issue. They consistently dismiss it as an un-Canadian or alt-right behavior. And and that is not a theory that you're coming up with, Mr. Sandberg. That's in their own words. As I said earlier on, Gerald Butts said this is essentially, the ideology from the alt-right. And the Minister of Immigration, Mr. Hussein, said, you don't agree with what we're doing? You are therefore un-Canadian. Again, it's outrageous and it's egregious and it should not be tolerated. Let's see. I think we're running out of time here. And how about we end it on this? Valkyrie Sardo writes, did the con balloon ever get off the ground? Not to my knowledge. I know there was a fundraising campaign for it. And guys, do we have that hilarious photoshopped image of the baby con balloon over the skyline of London? Yeah, this was the answer to the baby Donald Trump balloon. There you go. Giant Sadiq Khan baby balloon to fly over London. I, for one, would love to see that in the air. Like I said here yesterday, whoever has the temerity to put that into the skies of the UK, you are probably going to get charged with a hate crime and do some hard time, because that kind of balloon, that's offside because of who the mayor is. A Donald Trump balloon, that's completely legit. And by the way, when we use terms like giant and enormous and colossal. Let's keep in mind that Trump balloon, it was not even 20 feet tall. I mean, it was like the size of a small bouncy castle. So a whole lot of helping of fake news there. And folks, it is 1 o'clock. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will be here tomorrow. I'm hoping to get the computer technology a little better down pat. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in, and I want to thank everyone who gave a donation in the super chat. A big hearty thank you as well. Folks, that's it for Battleground today. See you tomorrow, and remember, without risk, there can be no glory. Good afternoon.